Okay, you are listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. Tonight on the program, we'll be joined by David Mazer of Penn Environment to discuss Governor Shapiro's recent actions on fracking and President Biden's hydrogen hub plan, which will affect Philadelphia. Our own Lance Haver will discuss the many consumer issues coming before the impending Parker administration. So, Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. The election's over, so I'm crossing my fingers and hoping for the best. It doesn't matter how we voted. This is who we have as a new mayor. This is who we have as new council members. Whether you supported them or you didn't, it's time to at least hope for the best possible future for the city of Philadelphia and the people who live in it. And it's time to recognize that voting is only one part of being a good civic citizen. That involvement, showing up at the neighborhood meetings, letting your thoughts be known, participating in democracy is really part of voting. We can't just vote and leave it alone and expect everyone else to do it for us.
That's right. Democracy is a job in a way.
Right. And decisions get made by the people who show up.
That's right. It's the way it's always been. And I believe we have Denise Clay Murray. I'm not hearing anything. I'm seeing a message in the chat. Shortly. All right. Well, what we're going to do first, we're going to talk a little bit about fracking, hydraulic fracturing. And it's not something we see here in Philadelphia per se, but it's a major issue across the Commonwealth. And it's been something that I've kept an eye on for a while. And I was interested in something that just came down the pike a couple of weeks ago. So Governor Shapiro announced a couple of weeks ago that the Department of Environmental Protection is beginning a regulatory process to make fracking in Pennsylvania less dangerous for the environment and for public health. And this is coming right from the statement they put out. The newly proposed protections include increasing reporting by the fracking industry and its chemical use while drilling, setting standards to rein in the global warming pollutant methane commonly emitted during fracking, and strengthening standards for dealing with drilling waste and gas pipelines. The governor also announced a partnership with gas drilling company CNX Resources to disclose its chemical use and emissions monitoring. So before we do the interview, and there's Denise Clay Murray. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. It's good to see you in studio there. So before we show you the interview, I just want to talk a little bit about what hydraulic fracturing is. So I'm sure people have heard the term and maybe it didn't register. So this is what it is. And the National Resources Defense Council is a great environmental organization. They have a great website and they go into this in depth, more detail than we'll do here. So if you really want to take a look at that, I would really recommend them because they have a great section on this. So hydraulic fracturing basically is a technique used to extract natural gas or oil from shale and other forms of tight rock. And according to the National Resource Defense Council, in other words, impermeable rock formations that lock in oil and gas and make fossil fuel production difficult. So the way they do this is they take large quantities of water and chemicals and sand, and they blast it into these formations, and they crack the rock, and they allow that gas and oil to flow to the surface. All right. So it's basically, using the power of water to break these rocks open. Now, why is this a problem? What are the issues with this? First of all, it's the standard environmental concerns that I or most people would have over, let's say, oil extraction, right? Contributing to environmental issues, which has caused global warming and all other sorts of problems. That's the first thing. If you even just take that out of the equation, though, if you just want to look at it as what is it doing to the places where fracking occurs? Well, there's a lot of documentation about this, and it's at this point, I think, irrefutable. You will see in areas where fracking occurs when people turn their faucets on, the water comes out, it's brown because some of these chemicals have seeped into the water. You know, the water tables are underground. Some people get their water from those underground wells, and these are some of the problems you see. It creates issues with the methane because they don't capture it all. It goes into the air and causes other problems like that. And in some places, there is evidence to suggest that hydraulic fracturing is leading to earthquakes, actual earthquakes, because there is so much power in these devices that break up the rock, and it displaces rock and creates situations where the ground is unstable. So these are just some of the issues that occur with hydraulic fracturing. So we spoke to the people at Penn Environment, David Mazer, who's the executive director, and we asked him, okay, tell me about this. Is this a good thing or not? What are we really looking at here? I think he gave us a really good explanation of what this is. He also talked a little bit about there are some other things we could be doing. We also discussed a couple weeks ago, President Biden was in Philadelphia to talk about the possibility of, what is most likely going to happen, building what they call a hydrogen hub. And Philadelphia and the surrounding areas would be a beneficiary of this. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. So we talked a little bit about that and what that could mean environmentally. And as you'll see in the interview, I'm not sold on this. But let's go ahead and play the interview, and we'll talk a little bit more about it after we see it. So this is our interview with Penn Environment's David Mazer. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So before we get into fracking, can you tell us a little bit about Penn Environment and the kind of work you do?
Sure. Penn Environment is a statewide citizen-based nonprofit environmental group. So we work to promote clean air and clean water and protecting Pennsylvania's great outdoors and natural heritage, the public lands and open spaces we all enjoy and love. Like I said, we're a citizen-based group, so we represent tens of thousands of citizen members who are activists or volunteers or contribute financially to our work, and they're really the backbone of the organization and our effort to represent everyday Pennsylvanians on environmental issues they care about.
And I'm going to editorialize a little bit here. As a lifelong Pennsylvanian who comes from a long line of lifelong Pennsylvanians, my grandfather used to say, Pennsylvania has everything. You have the mountains, you have, cities, you have lakes, and we have it all here. And it's good to know that there's somebody out there protecting all that, because it needs to be done, because this is really, it's a special place, I always thought. So go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I totally agree. I moved to Pennsylvania 25 years ago from Minnesota, and I'd never visited before I moved here. And I was, really just awestruck by, the beauty and the outdoor places you just mentioned. As being a lifelong Pennsylvanian and your family, a line of lifelong Pennsylvanians, I think it's really a hidden jewel. A lot of people I know don't realize it till they come and see Pennsylvania and then realize the great natural resources and outdoor heritage and connection to our environment that we have. So it's a great place. We're protecting.
It absolutely is, and it needs to be protected. Now, as I said, I come from a long line of Pennsylvanians, and my people were coal miners. That's who I'm descended from, and I'm proud of that. But I also understand the problems that extracting natural resources from the ground can have. And there's been some news on the fracking front here in Pennsylvania, some things that Governor Shapiro did. Can you tell us a little bit about that and sort of the problem of fracking and what we've seen?
Sure. Well, about 2 weeks ago, Governor Shapiro made an announcement. It had a couple of pieces to it. One part was a partnership he was announcing with the gas drilling company CNX, Resources, which was sort of a government company partnership for CNX to disclose more chemical use and emissions monitoring, sort of things like that, which I thought, was fine. Penn Environment, obviously, we want businesses to try and be, better environmental actors, of course, but I think the real meat of the governor's announcement, he sort of, I thought, buried the lead a little bit in that at the same press conference, he announced as part of this larger, what he saw as a larger announcement with CNX Resources, that the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection will begin the regulatory process to tackle pollution from fracking in a variety of ways. So some of these newly proposed protections that the governor said his DEP will enact includes increasing reporting by fracking industry about its chemical use when they're drilling, setting standards to rein in methane pollution, which is a very potent global warming pollutant that's commonly emitted during activities, and then strengthening standards for dealing waste, gas pipelines. So a whole, battery of important safeguards that are, good first steps, I think, to rein in some of the pollution. So the governor made that announcement. Like I said, I thought he buried the lead. Most of the press conference was about the partnership with CNX Resources and what the company was going to do, a bit less on these other policies. But I tend to think these other policies have most profound effect positively for Pennsylvanians if they get over the finish line.
How prevalent is fracking here in Pennsylvania?
Well, that's one of those maybe glass half empty, glass half full questions in that, fracking occurs, it's sort of like a bit of a boom bust. Fracking occurs more or less regularly depending on the market price. Pennsylvania is, I believe, still the second largest natural gas producer in the US. So, in that way, it's fairly common. And on the, that's maybe the glass, I don't know which that is, half empty, half full. It's one of the halves. The other side is a lot of the fracking and well activity has slowed down, and the price is fairly low for natural gas. And historically, it's lower. When you look at the longer period of time, the industry feels less incentive to tap all of the gas because they want a high price to make more money. So it's slower than you would have seen when fracking started full throttle about 15 years ago. We saw really almost like a land grab, that you had sort of envisioned from the days of yore, where there was a lot of lease signing, a lot of activity, and in some ways that slowed down. But if you live near it, if you have a lot or a little, the reality is there's a lot of pollution, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of truck traffic, and the studies show it has a lot of negative effects on our health and environment. So certainly, if if it's hundreds of wells or thousands, depending when they're drilling and moving the gas, if you're in that region, it can really put a strain on your quality of life.
Mm-hmm. So do you believe that these new measures go far enough, and are there other things that government could be doing?
Sure. I mean, the short answer is yes, we should be doing more. I would argue they're a good first step, but they don't go far enough. Larry, as you know, this question has to be taken in two ways. There's sort of the answer, and there's the political answer. And by that, I mean, the substantive answer is, should we be doing more? Absolutely. Do we have the technology to do more? Absolutely. Government for a long time has supported transitioning to 100% renewable energy. That's what we need to do. The scientific community has said to solve climate change. We have to get off of fossil fuels. And we know today we have the technology to do that. And then the question is, do we have the political will to do that? for someone who works in politics, I'm fairly optimistic. I believe we put a man on the moon, 60 years ago. We shot a man into outer space and he walked on the moon. And if we could do that, in the 20th century, in the 21st century, we can get our energy in ways that are clean, healthy, safe, affordable for Pennsylvanians and people around the globe. So in a substantive way, we can do more. The technology shows we can do more. Study after study shows we could get all of our energy from clean sources by promoting energy efficiency and conservation. We could get off of fossil fuels. There's by the way, Larry, about a dozen states have passed laws to require that all of their energy comes from renewable sources. They have varying dates, 2030, 2035, 2050, and that's driving the market. So on the one hand, can we do it substantively? Yes. Now, politically in Pennsylvania, which, as you noted, is a big fossil fuel state historically, it's a purple state. It's probably a heavier lift to think that we're going to ban fracking or require all of our energy come from clean sources and really cut the cord with fossil fuels in the Commonwealth. Certainly, I would love that if the state would do that. Penn Environment would support that. But that's a pretty heavy lift when you look at, who's for it and who's against it. So I think, that's why I think we have to what can you do politically? That's a very different question than what do we have the technology to achieve in society today.
Mm-hmm. So there's another energy related project that just came to light. President Biden announced the possible expansion of hydrogen, especially here in Pennsylvania. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what your take on that is, whether or not that's a good idea, an okay idea? What do you think?
Sure. As part of the Inflation Reduction Act, Congress and President Biden included I believe about $7 billion to essentially serve as seed money to fund and invest in they're being called the hydrogen hubs. There are a list of 7 of those that recently were approved by the Department of Energy, the Biden Department of Energy. Most of them are multi-state, so it's 7 projects, but it spans about 16 states. And these are projects that will receive, like I said, cumulative about $7 billion. There's one in Eastern Pennsylvania in Philly, the Mach 2 proposal. There's one in that will include Southwestern Pennsylvania, so the Pittsburgh area as well. And each of those is getting, I believe, between $750 million to $950 million of taxpayer money. And these have been fairly controversial because, and I should add, by the way, Larry, these are they have different criteria, but some are supposed to be called what's being referred to as green hydrogen. Hydrogen has sort of a different colors coated with it. It's sort of a rainbow of hydrogen. If it's green hydrogen, it's supposed to be hydrogen made where the energy to produce the hydrogen comes from renewable energy, solar and wind, for example. You have pink hydrogen, which is made from nuclear power. I recently learned we have orange hydrogen, which is incineration. You use trash incineration to create the energy to then make the hydrogen. And we have blue hydrogen, which is from fossil fuels. And so these projects were fairly controversial because hydrogen hub projects are often touted as clean, but it's not necessarily so. It really depends on the energy you use in the first place to actually produce the hydrogen would tell you if it's clean or not. And that's created some real quagmires in these hydrogen hub proposals because many are very open that they're going to rely on frack gas and other fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. Some are saying they'll use frack gas as sort of a precursor on their way to try and convert to green hydrogen, but it's unclear, if they will ever be able to achieve that. And, so there's a lot of questions. Obviously, when you're spending billions of dollars of the taxpayers' money, we think it should be done wisely. And we certainly shouldn't be investing in projects that will continue our reliance on dirty fossil fuels and make it harder to tackle climate change. So, I think a lot of the questions now are, what are the rules, or often we hear the term guardrails, that will be put in place to ensure that these projects are done in ways that are truly green and good for our planet. And I'd add one other concern, Larry, which is, even if hydrogen works, the environmental community would argue we should really only be using that energy for the sectors of our economy that require energy and fuel, but are hard to decarbonize. They have a footprint, but we don't have a good alternative on how to get them off of being climate emitters. So, if you think of your house, making steel, freight traffic on large cargo ships, making concrete. Many of these sectors are what we call hard to decarbonize. And I say that because we believe that if we're going to make this energy, hydrogen, which in many ways is untested and could on the front end create or rely on carbon pollution, it should be trying to decarbonize these hard to decarbonize sectors. One other thing, if I may, Larry, add is, I think it's also important for people to realize hydrogen is sort of the most inefficient way to use this energy. And what I mean by that is, it's just easier if you have solar panels on your home, or if the Jersey Shore put wind turbines up, which now it looks like maybe they aren't going to do all those. But the most efficient is to make the energy, turn it into electricity, and run your home. The solar panels on your house would just power your home. As you can imagine, the idea that you'd have wind turbines in the Atlantic Ocean make electricity, which will ship across the whole state of New Jersey to the Mach 2 proposal, hydrogen hub in the Philly area, create energy to then make a hydrogen fuel, to then take that hydrogen and run a SEPTA bus. All those steps are wildly inefficient versus just keeping that energy at the shore and making electricity to run a home directly, turning it into power to use. So there's a lot of concern that it's very inefficient. It can rely on dirty sources. It is taxpayer funded, so you don't want it to be a boondoggle for the taxpayers. And it could increase our addiction to fossil fuels. So there's a lot of concern and skepticism about hydrogen hubs and even hydrogen fuel as a fuel source that can be brought to scale the way that most of our other energy sources today are, even the dirty ones.
Whenever I hear we're going to do something new with energy, and then it's not solar, wind, or hydro, harnessing the power of the rivers and all that, I wonder why. And now that we've talked about it, I didn't know that we're going to be using renewable energy to create hydrogen, which to me just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Cut out the middleman. Yeah. Use the things that we know are not as harmful, if harmful at all. I don't feel any better about this.
Yes, we share your concern, and again, it's, I think, added when it's our taxpayer dollars that we want the government, when they partner with corporate partners, to be good stewards, not just of our planet, but certainly of our hard-earned tax dollars. But there are real risks, and even with the ARC2 proposal, which is in southwestern Pennsylvania, the Pittsburgh area, the companies pushing that are saying that they're going to take frack gas, ship it through pipelines to a facility that will be based in West Virginia, make hydrogen, and they're saying they're even going to use it for residential use. And when you think of that, that sounds crazy that we would try and convert homes to run on hydrogen. And probably it's just more efficient to take the frack gas and use it as natural gas to run homes which are already set up to run natural gas. I'm not saying we should, but you can imagine from an efficiency point of view, and capture that efficiency versus piping it to a facility all the way in West Virginia, burn it to make hydrogen, to take the hydrogen and then try and find a residential source. Or the Mach 2 proposal in Philly, they're proposing to run SEPTA buses on hydrogen. You know, we're a big believer SEPTA should be moving to electric buses. There's fleets all over the world are using electric buses. We have the infrastructure. Why would we want SEPTA to build a giant hydrogen infrastructure and take clean energy off the market that we need to run our homes and businesses to do that? So there's a lot of skepticism around, and a lot of unknowns, unfortunately, which add to the skepticism.
All right. Well, can you tell us how people can learn more about your work and the things you're working on right now?
That feels like such a softball pitch. It's unfair, Larry. Obviously, the best way, that's a gratuitous plug for Penn Environment. Thank you.
Yes.
Obviously, the best way is folks can visit our website, pennenvironment.org. Has information about all of our different environmental campaigns, if it's fracking, hydrogen hubs, our work to rein in single-use plastic, protect pollinators and bees, promote clean air and clean water, clean up toxic dump sites, all those things. Folks can get involved. We have all sorts of tools. At Penn Environment, we think it's important to educate the public, but also we believe strongly in small d democracy, people being civically engaged for the things they care for and care about. We have an email action list. People can sign up right on our website. We have a cool texting tool. So when there's a big vote in Congress, the same day or in the state house, people could get a text saying, hey, there's a vote this afternoon on a global warming bill. Click here to send a message right now to your state representative or senator and tell them to vote the right way. So, we've created some modern tools to enhance and make activism more fun and easier. And, so we certainly love when people sign up and, join the movement of Pennsylvanians who are, advocating for a healthy planet and a healthy environment.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for doing that work and protecting the best place in the world. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for doing your work to get the word out. So thank you.
All right. We would like to thank David Mazer from Penn Environment for being with us. And they're going to come on every so often to keep us updated on what's happening in the Commonwealth in regards to environmental issues, because that's very important. And when they have major initiatives they're working on, or when major stories break. So we're very excited that they'll be on more often with us. Denise, what really kind of got me a little nervous, a little upset maybe, was when we were talking about the hydrogen hub, that we're going to use clean energy to create the hydrogen. And I just don't understand it. And I got to say this too. I think in the first can we bring Lance up? The first conversation, Lance, that you and I ever had, I think we talked about, amongst other things, pumps in the Schuylkill River that could generate electricity and probably power Manayunk. And when I start thinking about new kinds of energy, I think about things like that. I'm not thinking about hydrogen.
Well, let's start a little bit with some good news, which is we were being told that there were going to be a new generation of nuclear plants that were modular, that would be opening up across the country. The company that was promising that it would be efficient, that it would be affordable, that it was a new nuclear age, has just told us, no, it can't be done, and has canceled all those projects.
That's good.
On the one hand, we're now seeing a recognition that we have to do something differently, that we have to move beyond where we were. And the question as to what that will look like is not that easy. And I was listening very interestedly to hear about the problems with hydrogen, because hydrogen powered cars, hydrogen powered fuel pumps has been, again, one of those promises that has never been achieved. We are in Philadelphia very fortunate to have both rivers, and that has the potential to generate electricity. But the current thinking, of course, is we can no longer have dams. We can no longer have hydropower, that interferes with the natural flow of the rivers. It interferes with the ecosystems. And of course, I don't think anyone wants to see any part of Philadelphia flooded so that we can have a dam and we can then generate electricity. So that becomes the real challenge. How do we have what's called low head hydro, meaning how do we generate electricity with a very low fall of water, with only what's called in-stream generation, as opposed to the hydro dams? I think many of us who are in my age bracket know that Lake Wallenpaupack up in the Poconos, which is a spectacular lake, flooded town after town after town so it could become a power dam. And it needed to actually have a river to spill off to. So the Lackawaxen River is where the dam releases. And that fall, the distance that the water goes from the top of the lake to the bottom of the Lackawaxen, that's what generates the power to turn the turbines. And as we advance technologically, we have to find ways of doing that. And when I worked for the city, when I worked for Council President Clark, one of the projects I worked on with the council president was putting out requests for proposals to harness the power of the Schuylkill River as the water department was rebuilding what are called locks, which are something that the water rivers used to have when we used the rivers as roads. To float the barges up, to float the barges down, we had locks, and those locks were an instrument that allowed us to have rivers to bring the coal barges up and the coal barges down, and actually lumber as well. There's a part of Pennsylvania called Mast Hope, Pennsylvania, way up on the Delaware River. And it was called Mast Hope because it was the last hope for finding trees big enough to be masts on boats. So we've used the rivers for wood, we've used the rivers for coal, and to do all that, we had to have a lock system. So as we go forward, those are all possibilities, as you're pointing out. There may be better ways than the hydrogen hub. Saying that, though, one of the difficulties in everything is how do you get the electricity from one place to another? And we have not learned how to do that efficiently. Again, there are scientists out there who say that they can find a way to transmit electricity from the generation point to the point it's used without any loss. Even though that promise has been there for at least 30 years, the realization of that promise has yet to come to fruition. So it's very hard for us to figure out how do we take the power that we generate from a solar cell, from a windmill, from even hydro, and how do we transport it as energy efficiently? There are people who believe that it's easier to transport hydrogen efficiently than it is to transport electricity efficiently. There are people who believe that you can use the power of the river to generate hydrogen, which can be used as a fuel. And that is easier to transport than it would be to try and figure out how to transport the electricity from the river into the system so that we could have electric buses. I thought Penn Environment's position was great. I really enjoyed listening to them. I think it's a wonderful organization. I'm not as sure as they are, though, that having the government invest literally hundreds of millions of dollars is a mistake, even though without question, some of the projects that are funded will fail. Some of the companies that are funded will fail. But if we don't try new things, if we don't invest in the future, if we don't have hope for what we can do, it's hard to imagine how we're going to get beyond where we are.
That's absolutely right. And, and I said it in the interview, whenever I start hearing about new energy projects, I'm always surprised that it's not what you're talking about, because the technology's there. It's better than it ever has been. And on a large scale, what I've read is that it could be successful. So I again, investing in Philadelphia is always a good thing, I think. I'm never going to say no to that. And I agree with you on that. I just wish it was solar or, or the river project. It's right there. Why, why aren't we trying this? So-
One word, lobbyists.
yeah.
And I say that because until see what people don't realize about fossil fuels, and I don't even think the folks that do fossil fuels understand this, they are a finite resource. Eventually, one of two things is going to happen. We're either going to completely run out of them, or we're going to have to rely on some really unstable people to keep us in fossil fuels. And to an extent, if you look at the Middle East and some of the stuff that's going on there, we are kind of relying on some pretty unstable people to keep our cars on the road. And, we could start, mining gas and oil in the Alaskan mountains, and we could, continue to tear up um, areas in the Midwest and out west and in the South, and just go oil nuts. But eventually, the folks are going to have to realize that this is a finite resource. While the sun, at least the sun as it currently stands, is not. If we're not careful, though, and we don't start to realize that oil is a finite resource, we might find out that the sun is very angry with us and, start having the kinds of conditions where you walk out your door and you spontaneously combust. So I think that once people kind of disconnect the profit margin from fossil fuels, um, you'll start to see, more people saying, okay, the sun is a much cheaper way to do this. It's not as harmful to the environment. It doesn't cause like asthma clusters and different things. So why don't we try that? But until people stop making money off of it, in terms of being lobbyists for the fossil fuel industry, we're going to be where we are. And what's really frightening to me is if you look at the green energy plans that are out there, um, green energy plans that include job creation, that include good job creation. If you look at those plans and you look at them objectively, you could stop relying completely on fossil fuels tomorrow. And it might actually help a lot of people who are in poverty
hmm
get out of poverty.
Yeah. Because, the implements to harness the renewable electricity have to be built somewhere.
Mhm.
And those could be very good jobs for people. And you could put them in places that have coal mines
Mhm.
and say, okay, instead of being in the coal mine, work in this factory, make more money. I feel like there's so many different ways that renewable energy is the way to go, yet there just isn't the will to do it for the reasons Denise discussed.
I think I understand what you're saying, Larry. I would like to just, as a bookmark, point out that we are putting solar cells on houses. We
Mhm.
are building windmills. It is not that all of the energy to protect the environment by groups like Penn Environment has been wasted.
Right.
It has actually had a tremendous impact on our society. The fact that we're having these conversations now shows how successful it's been. So while I recognize how far we have to go, and it's a long way, as Denise points out, it's just an unbelievably long journey to get to where we should be. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we've started the journey because of groups like Penn Environment, because
Absolutely.
of environmentalists, because 30 years ago, people saying this were considered crazy. And now it's relatively mainstream. you can kind of see the success of the environmental movement. And again, I'm not suggesting that we don't have a long way to go, that there aren't very serious problems. But it's rare to find a town now that doesn't have a recycling program. There's not a single store in Philadelphia that's giving away single-use plastic bags anymore. It's the norm to go to a supermarket and find that you have a choice of buying produce that's been grown without pesticides, that you can buy fish or meat or chicken or fowl that has been grown without pesticides, without antibiotics. So those are all steps in the right direction. The question is, how do we get the impetus and how do we continue down that road? And I think Denise's point is well taken. There's so much money involved in Chevron and ExxonMobil, in the oil companies. Chevron is now buying Hess. This is going to be a multi-$100 billion merger. And even if you only get 1% of that to spill out into the hands of the lobbyists, into the campaign contributors, and I'm not sure we should call them contributors. I think we should call them campaign investors. Even if you get 1% of that, you're going to see the problem that Denise is talking about. The counter to that argument, of course, is that, as Penn Environment was saying, citizens showing up and being heard is the only counter there is to that. And the hydrogen hub, we can hope that it will be successful. We can recognize the challenges, but I don't worry about our tax dollars being wasted because they invest in something that turns out not to work. We can talk about all of the things that our tax dollars have gone to that have harmed us. And we can talk about our tax dollars being used to advance technology that at the time didn't seem to make any sense. And the easiest one all the time to point out to is the internet. When the government was spending money to develop the internet, nobody really knew what it was going to be. But of course, we are fortunate that our government did invest in those things, and now we are all beneficiaries of it. And I would like to find the person who doesn't understand that the internet has offered strategies and abilities and capabilities that were far exceed what was invested in it. There are problems with the internet. Yes, there's difficulties. We don't reach everyone. As technology advances to the point where middle-class people are using it, and then it becomes a universal need. And so we have people who are struggling, who don't have access to the internet, who don't have computers at home, who are being shut out of government services. Even if you want to go ahead and try and get food stamps, use the Compass program, the easiest way to apply for it's online. And of course, we know that many of us don't have internet capabilities all of the time. So I think all those things complicate the issue, but I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that it was the government's involvement in the space program. It was the government's involvement in what do we do with what was called the old Laurel system, which was a system that was trying to help navigation, and the GPS system that we originally used for satellites and we originally used for war have had tremendous capabilities for regular rank and file people to use.
Any major accomplishment of the 20th century had government backing or was done by the government. And, it's never lost on me that that's the case, because you have so many people saying, well, the government gets in the way. Well, no, the government's the reason we're here talking to you on the internet right now. So now, Lance, you talked about a long journey here. We have another journey coming up that we're going to start in January. That is the Parker administration or new city council. But there are lingering consumer issues out there that should be addressed. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think we can start with the gas works. So the PGW has received and will implement still another rate increase. It's relatively small, but as prices continue to go up, and even as we hear quote unquote good news from all of the people who run the economy saying inflation is down this month, and the constant rate increases for interest rates have slowed the economy, so inflation's not bad. Even though we've heard all that, we know people continue to struggle. They struggle when they go to the supermarket. They struggle when they go to buy a home. They struggle when they go to pay rent. So another 3% increase on top of the water rate increase really makes it very difficult for regular rank and file workers who are making $30,000 or $35,000 a year. So the first question becomes, what is the new administration going to do to try and keep PGW rates, natural gas rates down? Will they try and use some of the money that's been set aside for the hydrogen hub to try and figure out how PGW can diversify? Can PGW be part of that experiment, get some of that money, and use that money to offset the constant need for rate increases? Here's the difficult fact. As we use less gas, that means that every cubic foot of gas that is sold has to be charged more. There's really no way about it. The actual pipes, the infrastructure stays the same. And every time we sell less gas, that means you have to collect more on every 100 cubic feet of gas that's sold, unless PGW figures out something else to sell, some other way of making money. There's been some discussion about that with how PGW stores gas and can buy it at a very low cost in the summer and then sell it to other gas utilities in the winter when there's a tremendous need for it. But all of those strategies have not been enough to stop the constant rate increases. And the question will be, will the new administration do something with the hydrogen hub to keep that down? Similarly, there's the water department. As we've spoken about on the show for the last 2 years, the water department has seen rate increase after rate increase after rate increase, 4 continual years of rate increases. The combined increase has been over 25%. And again, just like PGW, that puts a huge burden on people. So the new administration, what will it do? Will it combine PGW and the water department services? As it is now, the water department hires out-of-state contractors to do billing, to do meter replacement. Will the new administration put an end to that and say that the water department cannot hire out-of-state workers, cannot go to Montana or go to Mississippi or go to Georgia to hire workers? They've got to hire Philadelphians who are going to enjoy those jobs. So those are 2 real simple things that the new administration is going to deal with. The next issue that I think of as a consumer issue is real estate taxes. Now, I know not everyone owns a home, and I know those of us who do own a home are fortunate. But even when it comes to rent, if you rent, the real estate tax assessment is going to have some impact on what you pay for rent. Last year, for the first time in many years, there was no reassessment. And so that means the question is going to be, in this year, when the new administration comes into office, will there be another reassessment of our property values? And will those reassessments cause property taxes to go up by a third, by a half? We don't know the impact of that. We do know that when Council President Clark was running City Council and the assessments are so high, his solution was to increase the homestead exemption. The homestead exemption is a certain amount of dollars that come off the value of your home before you start paying taxes. So it was at $45,000. Council President Clark and council forced the mayor to raise it to $80,000. As a result, if your house is worth $100,000 and you get an $80,000 homestead exemption, you only pay property taxes on the $20,000 left. That actually ends up being somewhat of a progressive tax, because the more your house is worth, the less value the homestead exemption has. Concretely, again, if your house is worth $100,000 and you get an $80,000 tax exemption, you pay taxes on $20,000, 20%. If your house is worth $1 million, you still get the same $80,000 tax homestead exemption, but that means you're paying taxes on $920,000. Your exemption, rather than being 80%, is 8%. So that builds in some progressivity to real estate taxes. But what is the new administration going to do? Are they going to challenge the new assessments? Are they going to challenge the law that requires the city to continue to reassess property taxes every year? It is a curiosity that we know that property tax assessments are theoretical. When somebody comes and looks at your house and says, this is what it's worth, they're guessing. They don't know. The only way to actually know what a house is worth is when it's sold. In addition, one of the dangers of the system we're currently using is when a neighborhood community gets together does park cleanups, puts an end to the short dumping, organizes itself to try and end the neighborhood struggle around drug dealing on the corners, tries to shop locally and bring in stores. That neighborhood improvement draws other people into the neighborhood, and it also draws in developers. As the developers build new buildings or new houses, those houses tend to sell for a significant amount more. And as because of that, the property taxes go up for everybody. And the question is the new administration going to step in and say, when the assessors go out to look at people's homes, are they going to be able to count as comparables the new developments, the new buildings, the new things that the developers have built in old neighborhoods that are creating the difficulties? There are a number of programs that are specifically designed to help people stay in their homes. One's called the Loop program. We haven't seen that analyzed. If it's been analyzed, the numbers haven't been released. And that would become a curiosity for the administration to deal with. What are they going to do to counter continual reassessments of property taxes and help people stay in their homes? If there was one candidate who continually talked about helping middle-class neighborhoods like West Oak Lane or working-class neighborhoods like West Oak Lane, it was the mayor-elect. She consistently, time and time again, made that point that that's where she grew up, that's where she's from, that's the focus of her work, and that's who she's going to struggle to help. So the question is going to be, what happens when those homes are reassessed? Are people going to be forced out? Are the programs going to be challenged? Are we going to challenge the law that requires us to use a nameless, faceless assessor to decide how much property taxes we should have? In every other part of the state, other than Philadelphia County, reassessments have to be what's called revenue neutral. So if your real estate taxes are increased by 1%, then the amount that you tax has to go down by 1%. In Philadelphia, that's not true. So the property taxes can be reassessed by 1%, and that gives the city of Philadelphia an automatic increase in what it brings in of 1%. So every time housing goes up by 3%, the city has 3% more money to spend. Delaware County, Bucks County, Chester County, throughout the rest of the Commonwealth, 3% increase in real estate means you pay less, 3% less in the tax rate. Doesn't work out perfectly, but it says to the city, to the county, to the towns, we're not going to let you have a backdoor tax increase by letting an assessor go out and say the houses are worth more, and we're going to keep the tax rate the same. So we'll have to see what happens there. We're also going to have to see what happens with SEPTA. We've talked about it on the air several times. We've had SEPTA's experts on it, but the bus revolution has supposedly been completed. We went to the hearings. We're waiting for the hearing examiner's report. It should have been out last week or 2 weeks ago. Supposedly, it still hasn't been released. SEPTA board's going to meet this month, and I'm not sure whether it's going to be on the agenda or not. But what is the new administration going to do? The current makeup of the SEPTA board gives the city very little leverage on the SEPTA board. The city has less than 17%. The way it works is every county gets 2 representatives on the board. So 2 from Bucks, 2 from Delaware, 2 from Chester, 2 from the city of Philadelphia, and 2 from Delaware. Then the majority and minority leaders of the state house and the state senate get an appointment, and the governor gets an appointment. So the city really, which is 80% of the systems in the city of Philadelphia, 80% of the local funding, the local match, comes from the city of Philadelphia, and 80% of the riders are here in Philadelphia, but really has less than 15% of the board vote. That's not to say that the city's without power, because the city controls the local match. And for every dollar the city puts into SEPTA, SEPTA gets $8 from the state. The city has quite a bit of leverage in talking to SEPTA about how that money is used and what can be done. So we're going to have to see, is the new administration going to be more proactive in defending SEPTA riders in the city? Are we going to finally have an understanding of who's paying cash, again, as it is now? If you use a key card, if you have access to a credit card, if you can link your bank account to a debit card or a credit card, you can use a key card continually. That ride, one ride, cost you $2.50. I'm sorry, cost you $2 for if you don't have a card, and because you don't have a bank account, you're unbanked, or there's no machines near where you live, or for whatever reason, that same $2 ride costs $5. The first transfer, if you use the key card, the first 2 transfers are free. If you don't use, and the cost of the ride is $2. If you can't get access to a key card, the ride costs $2.50. You can't buy a transfer, so the transfer is another $2.50. So that becomes a $5 ride that costs someone who's middle class $2. And so we'll have to see if the administration decides that it's going to look at that and do what it can to help. Another issue is the procurement issue. The way the city buys things has been controlled by the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter. The Home Rule Charter has been a great document. It served the city of Philadelphia well. But we don't buy things the same way that we bought them in the 1950s. In fact, a lot of what we do has changed dramatically because of the computers, because of the internet, as we spoke about it before. And what we see is for businesses who want to do business with the city of Philadelphia using the current procurement system, one of the easiest ways to get a contract with the city is for the business to move out of the city, to stop paying Philadelphia taxes, to stop paying Philadelphia wage tax, and to do what it can to move outside of the city. There is a 5% benefit for a local business to bid, but rarely is that enough. And you can see by how many contractors have left the city so that they can get contracts to build things in the city. And right now, we don't know how much of what the city buys is from a local company in Philadelphia, from a local company in Pennsylvania, or even from the United States. And we're going to have to see whether the new administration is going to have a look at the procurement rules and try and change that. One of the things that we saw during the water rate case is that there is a municipal buying cooperative that would save money that the water department claims it can't join because of the old procurement rules. And finally, what are we going to do with the leftover money from the American Recovery Act plan? One of the things that other cities have done is to buy up medical debt for the people who were sick during COVID and who have been stuck with very large medical bills. Is that money going to be set aside? I saw recently that Council Member Thomas wants to lower the business taxes once again. The question is that what the money is going to be used for, or is the money going to be used to buy off medical debt, buy down medical debt, free people from the debt, and help middle and working people? So these are all things that were not discussed during the election. Understandably, the focus was on safety, was on schools, and what to do about the horrible situation in Kensington, where we really are struggling to figure out what to do with people who have the illness of addiction. But for many of us, these middle class issues are front and center for our life, and those questions remain open.
All right. Well, and those are the questions we're going to be asking of the new administration when they take office and before they take office.
And by the way, it looks like Denise's PICO bill wasn't paid.
Yes.
Well, it's actually not my PICO bill. It's
some
it's Philly Cam's, and in any case, I'm sitting in the dark now.
Well, we're not going to say that's because the windmill isn't turning, right? We're going to say that's
Well,
some reason.
I'm guessing that they had the lights set for a certain time to go off, and someone forgot I was in here.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we'd like to thank everybody for watching us. We'd like to thank David Mazer from Penn Environment for joining us. He'll be back on regularly, I hope. And we will be back next week for another episode of Hall Monitor. Thank you and good night.